Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Varun. I'm a freshman at Yale University, and it's my privilege today to introduce the Global Energy Perspectives panel. Now, as someone at the very beginning of my clean energy journey, it's immediately apparent that the industry is deeply intricate and very nuanced. Policy, technology, markets, and strategy vary across a wide number of scales, one of the most prominent being location. We're very lucky today to have experts from China, India, and Sub-Saharan Africa join us, sharing their perspectives on the current clean energy landscape and how it needs to evolve in these three crucial locations. Our moderator today is Ambassador Paul Simons. Ambassador Simons has been actively engaged in clean energy and climate change policymaking for more than 2 decades. Since 2020, he has served as a senior fellow at Yale's Jackson School of Global Affairs, teaching and mentoring students in the clean energy transition. He is also the founding director of the Yale Emerging Climate Leaders Fellowship, a new program to develop a network of leading clean energy and climate change practitioners from the Global South. Now, without further ado, here is Ambassador Simons to introduce our panelists.
So, thank you so much, Varun, for the kind introduction. It's great to be back here. This is the second year that I've been invited to participate in the Yale Clean Energy Conference. And I'm really honored to be joined on the stage by 3 absolutely top climate practitioners representing what I think are the 3 poles of most important climate action between now and 2050 and beyond. So it's great to have my good friend Binbin Wang here. Binbin is a Yale World Fellow, but she's also one of China's most prominent intellectual climate leaders. She's really been out in front for years, running the climate change communication program in China, working academically, working with the government. She's really something of the right hand of the Chinese chief climate negotiator, Xi Jinping. So we're really honored to have Binbin with us. We're also absolutely delighted to have Smita Rakesh with us from India, a country which is developing a huge middle class, which is going to be the source of enormous economic growth and clean energy growth over the next few decades. And Smita is an activist. She's a partner at Social Alpha, which is an organization that deploys clean energy solutions from a community perspective. She's an extraordinary innovator and also a Yale World Fellow. So we're delighted to have 2 of our most prominent Yale World Fellows. And we are finally absolutely delighted to have Andrea with us. Andrea, who's also a participant in the certificate program here at the SOM. Andrea Aricale, he doesn't look African, but he is the expert, one of the experts on energy access in Africa, working as a consultant for the World Bank in their Global Energy Solutions Group for many years. He has previous work at the Economist Intelligence Unit, and he is ideally positioned to provide us the perspective on Africa and some of the energy access challenges that he works on day by day. So it's a great panel, and so let's get right into it. So I'm going to ask, first of all, each of our 3 panelists for some very brief introductory remarks. Just introduce yourself quickly. Perhaps just say a few words about your current position and outline a little bit about how you got passionate about clean energy. So, Binbin, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Paul, for the so warm introduction. And my current position is the Executive Secretary General of Global Alliance of Universities on Climate, and I also the Associate Dean of Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University. At the same time, I take care of Minister Xie Zhenhua, China's Special Envoy on Climate Change. He has a special climate fund, and we sponsor new ideas towards the net zero future. And why I feel so, optimistic on climate. So my starting point on climate is Copenhagen. It's in 2009, the first COP for me, COP 15. So I witnessed what happened in the previous years, full of ups and downs. And nowadays, more than 136 countries have announced their carbon neutral goals, together with thousands of multi-stakeholders. So I think, wow, yes, it's when we talk about carbon neutral, it's about renewable energy transition, green transition. So, and all you guys are in this field, you are expert. So we together really can change the world. So this is why I'm, now I'm a stubborn optimist.
Thanks, Bin. We need that optimism. Smita, over to you.
Sure. Such a privilege and honor to be here, and you're too kind with your words and with the introduction. As Paul said, I work on supporting clean energy and climate solutions in India, essentially those that work on avoiding GHG emissions, but also at the same time looking at solving development challenges that India faces around energy access, around livelihoods of low-income communities, especially small and marginal farmers, around problems such as waste management, and also ensuring that those who are most vulnerable to climate change are not going to face the brunt of, as we transition to clean energy and to climate neutral solutions, we don't sort of make them suffer the second time over. So with that kind of an approach, my organization, Social Alpha, we work on investing in clean energy solutions with a philanthropic mindset. So the heart and the intentionality and the impact framework comes from philanthropy, but we borrow the toolkits of business world, of the venture capital world, in order to make a more sustainable change. So we make equity and grant-based investments, but more than that, we also support, we run a network of incubators in partnership with governments and industries to support these innovations in their lab-to-market journey. And we also run a range of accelerators with very specific goals around product trials and scale-up. In fact, we've recently been running a program and an entire initiative that scales up energy access solutions that intersect with livelihood goals, because there are many successful pilots waiting for funding to be scaled up in countries like ours. And why am I passionate about this area? I mean, I come from India, where while we are the third largest energy consumer, the per capita energy consumption is less than 1/3 of the global average. And India's energy consumption is expected to rise by 400% in the next 25 years. And as the most populous country, that's going to mean something for the world. So it is an area very, very critical to global climate action conversation.
Thanks so much, Smita. Andrea.
Thank you very much. Paul, it's a pleasure to join you, and distinguished panelists. It's fantastic to be here with you. I think it's a perfect segue from what Smita was saying, my personal introduction. I'm an energy specialist consultant with the World Bank, where I provide operational support, technical assistance, and knowledge leadership towards achieving universal energy access in client countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. I focus on distributed renewable energy, mostly standalone solar for households and businesses, and how the energy access sector developed in these last years shows where is my interest right now, which is reaching the most vulnerable, the most rural areas where the affordability is so low, and it's very hard to find a business model that actually works. What I support is also the electrification of public institutions to provide sustainable, reliable access to electricity to schools and hospitals. And in doing so, I lead a multi-stakeholder partnership within the World Bank for public institutions called DARES, where we bring together the entire World Bank groups and other stakeholders from outside to accelerate the electrification of public institutions, leveraging the private sector. How I got here, it's a little unique in the sense I'm a law graduate. I have nothing to do with energy. However, after my law degree, I decided that I felt the need to make an impact. And what's best than energy and climate? I got passionate about development, and with some virtue, admittedly, and help from Lady Luck, I started to work for the World Bank. But what really triggered my passion was after focusing on research and analysis for many years, I said it wasn't enough. And I started to get my hands dirty with operations. When you start to see the real impact you make somewhere, your life will not be the same. The level of professional reward and satisfaction that I started to get, and the personal sense of accomplishment that you get when you see what difference you make, it's really unique and warms my heart until now. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andrea. We have three absolutely skilled professionals here, but also you can feel that kind of human warmth, which is really great. So it's great to kind of feel the passion. So let's move on to our discussion on technical issues and policy issues. And of course, there's a very important event coming up at the end of this month, which we are all eagerly awaiting, which is COP28, possibly the most important climate change conference since Paris in 2015. A lot of expectations. And even though each of the three of you are not actually formal negotiators for your respective countries, I'm going to ask you to sort of put the country hat on and talk a little bit about what it is that India, China, and Africa are looking to bring to the table at this COP. What are the primary interests? What are the primary goals? So perhaps, Smita, we could start with you. Where does India? India was the chair of the G20 this year, played an outsized role on the global stage. How is India going to approach this year's COP?
Well, I mean, based on my understanding and what came out of the Delhi Declaration, the G20 as well, I feel like common but differentiated responsibilities is again something that's going to be pushed. And my sense is India is going to be assertive, more assertive than even before in this year's COP. I mean, I believe India's stand has always been assertive and yet collaborative. So I think the conversation on, there's going to be a push. I'm guessing developed countries will feel a pushback from India. And if you see from the like-minded developing countries submission that India made on behalf of the LMDC countries, it basically pushes back on global stocktake, which is going to be one of the most critical parts of COP this year. Assessing how we are performing, especially the developed countries are performing on their commitment with the NDCs made during the Paris Agreement. So I think an introspective and a more honest assessment is something on the table, and it'll be interesting to know, how other countries have performed, how all countries have performed on their commitments. I also think one of the interesting things that I liked in the submission by the like-minded developing countries is around defining the idea of equity and expanding it. So not just equity amongst nations and for individuals, which is how it is understood to be, but also expanding the definition of intergenerational equity to also include escaping the poverty trap, because that's very central to the problems that a lot of developing countries are facing right now. And also equity in using the carbon space. So some of those conversations, I think, are going to be good pushbacks, which I think the developed world needs to be ready to face. Also around, carbon negative targets and, not just net zero, but net negative targets by 2050. And therefore, a focus on carbon removal technologies is something that I'm hoping to hear more about. And more on maybe loss and damage funds and including developing countries. But I feel like that conversation anyway is going to be the center stage, given that this COP is going to be, is looking at a theme on inclusion and adaptation in a big way. Yeah.
fantastic. Quite an active role for India this year.
I'm hoping so.
And Bin, you've been very close to China's chief negotiator for many years. How do you see China playing itself this year as a COP? What will be the main issues, main concerns?
Yeah. So I think why, as Paul mentioned, this COP is so important is because it's a year for global stewardship. Yeah, so every country, all countries, we should review what we have done, whether we are satisfied with it, and where we should go. So this is like a historic point for all of us to pause, zoom in, and zoom out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go back our balcony. And for China, I tracked China's transition in the previous years. In 2009, China is a follower and try to learn how to participate in the global climate governance, how to play and contribute, in a proactive role. And then you can observe just before Paris Agreement, post first COP, right? COP 21, and China, US, announced the joint statement, and China, France also have another joint announcement. I think these two paved a very solid base for a successful Paris conference. And since then, China realized that, if I do more, I can really contribute a lot and show the collective leadership together with the US and the EU. So now when we talk about climate change, we all know that we cannot just put China aside. We should involve China. And for this year, I think China now is working very hard, prepare for their review their own stock talk. And the point is, I think it's opportunity, or maybe first is a challenge. The challenge is that how to help the world understand China correctly, or in a proactive way, in a constructive way. And I stay here. I have been here for more than 3 months as a World Fellows, and all the the dialogues, the talks about China's carbon neutral goal, started to say negative. But as I observed, there are a lot of misunderstanding, and I think it's mostly because of the COVID and the information gap there. And I can give you 2 cases. The first one is about China's carbon neutral goal. And most of the time when we mention China's goal, what's that? Who can tell me? China's carbon neutral.
2060.
2060, right? But the Paris Agreement mentioned we should reach carbon neutrality in the middle of this century, which should be 2050. So sound like China didn't, contribute a lot, right? It's not a very good guy. And I participate some process, when China prepares the announcement about the carbon neutrality in 2020. And actually, the proposal is that China really need to release ambitious goal, but considering, the domestic challenge, in COVID, how China can really keep the economic development as same as other countries, and how can make sure, the social problem in China will not impacted by such a rapid green transition, how to match the domestic map. So finally, China's carbon neutral goal, please, is before 2060. So we didn't choose by include 2060. China chose before, which means China will reach carbon neutral goal before 2060. And I think China tried its best to show the ambition, but unfortunately, similarly, the international community didn't get this point. So this is one case. China has ambition, but we didn't understand it. And the second case is about nowadays there are a lot of media reported, China, you back to coal, you rely on coal, and there are a lot of coal mining open again. And I think we can look around, countries in Europe also met this kind of problem, like Germany, right? And or even in US. So different country, like carbon neutrality is a really new sense for all humankind. And there are no existing pathway for all of us. And we should explore the creative road. And it should base on the context of each country. So for China really now move back a bit on coal. It's because, as I mentioned, the difficulties caused by the COVID. But at the same time, we should see on the other side, China's investment on renewable energy is number one. And I audit Paul's courses, which is very excellent. And Paul once mentioned, even all the oil company didn't announce their carbon neutral goal, but the biggest two oil companies in China, they did announce their carbon neutral goal. So, but no one heard of it because no one tells story in this way. And we can compare the pace. Just retreat a bit, but move forward very quickly. So Paul understands the challenge we faced when we talk about renewable energy. We know renewable energy, the problem is it's not stable nowadays, right? And another one is the cost is too huge. And so China now invests a lot on renewable energy to explore how to make sure its stability, at the same time, how to reduce the cost. So what I'm sure I have full confidence is that once China finds the answer, then it can repeat coal immediately, no doubt. So also can show a very good case for the rest of the world and also, encourage all of us to move ahead because we cannot change the green transition. It's another industry revolution for all humankind. And the renewable energy will change the whole system of human life. So once China realized, oh, yes, that is. And it's also a good opportunity, not only for the world, it's also good for China. So why China hesitate, right? So this is the second case I want to share with you. First is about the goal. Second is about the action. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Binbin. This was a really spirited explanation. I think you really made it clear.
Sorry.
We'll go back. We'll go back. We'll
yes.
go back later and cover the other point. But very, very spirited explanation of China's position going into COP28. So, Andrea, you wear a couple of hats. You wear the African hat, and you also wear the World Bank hat. So, what do you see as kind of the big challenges going ahead towards COP28?
And which hat is heavier?
Which hat is heavier, right?
You made me sound like the Mad Hatter in here. But yeah, well, okay. So it would be hard to continue after Binbin. I have to admit, it was hard to match her enthusiasm and passion. But okay, so let me speak about Africa first. Okay, I see in these global events and forums an increased leadership role from Africa. African countries are increasingly more organized. They are following leadership of some countries like Kenya, particularly, as the President Ruto really made a priority to speak up for the entire continent. And I feel that on the African continent, there is an increasing need to have ownership of the development projects that are being built in the country. Also, there is an increasing need for equity, in the sense that what Smita was saying, it's very hard to require from developing countries the same level of engagement that you would expect from a developed country in terms of the energy transition. It's much harder because the infrastructure is not there, yet somehow we expect developing countries to just commit to renewables 100%, and that is very hard. We don't take into account technical issues such as redundancy or such as the cost of investment. It's very hard, and I think we need to open our eyes to what this means. I cannot expect Malawi to give the same commitment to renewable energy as the UK, because if there are no wind resources in the UK for a couple of days, you could fire up a coal plant. What do you do in Malawi? It's not going to happen. So I feel that there is an increased vocality from this point of view. And on the other hand, now, the World Bank is making it increasingly important to address climate issues. Now, the mission of the World Bank, that's ending poverty and boosting shared prosperity, now added a little sentence, a few words under the guide of the President Banga, who's an incredibly interesting fellow. If you want to listen to his speeches, they're amazing. Ending poverty in a livable planet. Now, livable sounds a little, right? You would like a thriving planet, but regardless of that, the message is that climate is key. Because if we end poverty in a planet that is not livable, yes, of course, we'll end poverty, but we'll also end us all, right? Because there would be no planet to live on. And the World Bank is using COP and these events to really promote the increased role of energy, including access. On COP27 and 28, there are big events on energy access, in particular on the role of distributed renewable energy. So, especially for Africa, DREs are solar, standalone, and mini-grids. So, for example, in COP27, the World Bank launched an incredible multi-stakeholder partnership, which accidentally I'm working on. It's called the DARES platform, where the World Bank group as a whole, so World Bank, IFC, and MIGA, joins other stakeholders outside of the World Bank group, including the private sector, to accelerate the deployment of distributed renewables in developing countries, highlighting what's the role of the private sector here. Because
Sorry, Andrea, what's the name of that initiative again? Can you speak up a little bit?
Sorry, DARES, D-A-R-E-S.
Thank you.
It's an acronym. We're using now these fun acronyms but they are because it's very hard to actually remember the name of the project. The project is Distributed Access to Renewable Energy Services, accelerating this. So that's really what this is about, gathering stakeholders and making them join forces with a shared vision. And this shared vision at this moment is really to leverage private sector participation, because public finance is not going to be enough to meet universal access for all.
Thank you. We have, I think, three very eloquent descriptions of country and regional aspirations. Now I'm going to follow up on this COP28 question. I want you to take off your country hats. I want you to put on your personal hats, your personal passionate hats. And if there was one single element that came out of this COP, one deliverable, something you would like to see this COP conclude with, and I'm asking for it very short, no long speech, just very quickly. What is your expectation for the one most desirable outcome from the COP? And I'm going to go with Bin first.
Very good question. I think, I hope at the end of COP, all countries can get agreement, hopefully a legally binding agreement with at least 3 action point, which can show their ambitions that they will continue to reduce emissions and support developing countries in Africa and small islands, and especially the big countries can provide money, solid money on the loss and damage fund.
Thank you. That was very concise and very ambitious. Smita.
Well, I would love to see a solutions perspective. I would love to see a focus on solutioning, on innovations, particularly innovations in very early stages, which, according to many studies and quoting the IEA, which you're very familiar with, that more than 50% of solutions that could deliver on net zero have not reached the market yet and are in very early stages. So I would love to see an innovations-focused agenda.
Fantastic. Andrea.
Okay. They both cover some of the most prominent points. I'll add something else. I would like to see a commitment towards SDGs. Sustainable, a commitment towards sustainable development goals, like a serious commitment. Of course, I'm involved in SDG 7, which is universal access. But the point is that these sustainable development goals that have been set by the UN, some of them are very ambitious. Ending hunger, right? Yeah, of course. But it's going to be very hard. And the deadline is 2030. Now we're starting to have discussion about, yeah, okay, we're not going to make it. What are we going to do after 2030? Fair question. But look, we have a goal, a target that is so close, and we are not able to, to join our forces and to really make the effort that we needed. If we start to talk about beyond, we're going to lose all the traction that we worked so hard to get. So I think that we really, really need to step up our game and find ways to get there, not to think of, okay, no, let's do 2050. I mean, come on, of course, we can all postpone, but the point is that there is a target and we want to achieve it. It's just a matter of how.
Okay, that's terrific. I think we had a great exchange here on COP. I feel...
Just quickly...
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I think some early thoughts on what after 2030 would also be interesting to hear, because I feel like there's so much converging on that, but a little more of a thought process beyond it, yeah.
After 2030. I think that's a great observation, and that's a good segue into the next topic that we wanted to talk about, which is basically innovation and technology. So the IEA, in its energy technology perspectives, has kind of mapped out global emissions from now until 2050, and they basically said, look, the declines that we need between now and 2030 can be accomplished with technologies that are already basically competitive in today's marketplace. Solar PV, batteries, wind power, energy efficiency. But those technologies, to bend the curve between 2030 and 2050, some of them are still in the R&D stage. They're not necessarily mature at this point. So I wanted to ask the panel here their views on technologies. And I thought I might start with Andrea, since you're working in Africa. Mm-hmm. How do you see technology and innovation playing in Africa's effort to achieve SDG 7, for example, and in your general energy access work, how do you see technology playing a role?
Okay, thank you for the great question. So, indeed, you already answered my question. The technology is there. The technology is already there. But that doesn't mean that our work is over, because deploying technology, we have to see how. How do we use the finance? How do we structure the projects? And how do we make client countries, from the World Bank's perspective, to really own the approach that we are proposing? Now, there are 675 million people that lack access to electricity. In 2010, they were 1.1 billion. That's a great progress, isn't it? One thing. 70% of them are in Africa. 600 million people are in Africa. You want to guess how many people lacked electricity in 2010 in Africa? The same number. You know why? Because deploying access solution basically just kept up with population increase. And so with this projection in 2030, we still have 600 million people lacking access to electricity. That's absolutely unacceptable, because things are actually getting harder for us. Because now we reaped all the low-hanging fruits. Everybody that could be connected to the grid, most of them are connected. That's very easy to build a distribution line. There is already a generation there. Come on, what's the challenge there? Now it will be leaving no one behind, meaning very rural areas, no affordability, displacement settings, host communities, fragile countries. That is going to be our challenge. So it's going to be harder and harder. And this is where we need innovation, technological, but also deployment, like project innovation, finance innovation. We need to change approach. So the innovation here is we see what worked until now. And we know that it doesn't work anymore. We can't go around that path anymore because the low-hanging fruits have been reaped. So what do? First thing, we acknowledge. We always thought that access to electricity is a public sector issue, which is it? Because it is, because it's a government that wants to deliver access to electricity for all. Fine. But that's not just a public funding issue. We need to involve the private sector. And public funding has to be a catalyzer for private funding. Every dollar that I put from the public sector has to give me $1 or more from the private sector. So I conceive public financing in a different way to abate market barriers. Number two, this is about technology. The technology is there. Standalone solar, I'm talking about small systems like solar home systems. They have been game changers in Africa to reach customers in rural areas with low affordability. And why? Because at a certain point we realized we could make them pay in installments. We had the technology that's called pay-go, pay-as-you-go, where a customer can just pay for the consumption of electricity that they had with the fund that they have. And at the same time, they have access to electricity and they have to the amount that they actually needed because demand is actually a concern. So that's a second key area. And the third key area that I'm seeing and where technology and innovation is required, although it's already there, we just have to find a way to make it work for real, is the overlap between energy as an enabling factor to deliver human development goals. What does it mean? Energy for agriculture, productive uses of electricity. We are developing so many appliances. We're developing solar mills. There are so many solar refrigerators. I mean, it goes until hair clippers, anything that can produce sources of revenue. What happens? You increase the available income. There is more demand, and then you can deploy a higher system to let people go up the energy ladder. But also the overlap between energy and healthcare and education. Sustainable and reliable access to electricity for schools and hospitals. This is key. Because we, in the Western world, we cannot imagine how it is to go to a hospital without light. I mean, would you ever walk in there? I wouldn't, you know. And I was actually in Uganda a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a doctor in a rural hospital, and he said, look, anybody who's had anything to do with medicine and delivering babies know that the babies like to be born at night. Now, if you're born at night and you have no electricity, you have to bring candles. Like mothers are required to bring candles to give birth to their children. And what's crazier is that when hospitals are actually electrified, either the grid doesn't work or it's so expensive that they installed prepaid meters. The utility installed prepaid meters to say, okay, you put the money first, and then until you reach you have electricity until that amount, and then the rest you're not going to have. So what does this mean? That if you're born on October 28 instead of October 6, besides the fact that you'll be a Scorpio and not a Libra, the difference is that you will be born in the darkness. You will have to bring candles or a torch from your phone, and that's absurd. So that's the innovation that we're getting here to find sustainable business model for delivering reliable access to electricity in all of these sectors. Mm-hmm. I'll stop here.
That was very inspirational. Thank you, Andrea. But Smita, also, I mean, your work centers around bringing innovation to the social agenda, the social investment agenda. So what can you tell us a little bit from your work at Social Alpha in terms of how we can use innovation to spur climate progress?
Thank you. Innovation, to us and in our thesis is the most critical element, but it's not sufficient. So we say innovation necessary but not sufficient, so needs entrepreneurship, needs people and an entity with a business model to drive it forward, and therefore our funding and our support goes towards enterprises and towards entrepreneurs. And I'm deliberately not calling this, either an SME or a social enterprise because of the various connotations around profit-making or non-profit-making associated with it. But enterprises that make money out of sustainable businesses, but at the core of their work is actually impact. It's actually problem-solving of problems that are historically unaddressed. And the reason we look at innovation and these enterprises as the chief sort of vehicles of change is because these are complex problems where and they are all conflicting priorities. We're looking at the same pool of money for health issues, for energy access, and for climate goals. So we could either choose to see them as parallel competing priorities looking for the same pot of money, or build in agendas which are concentric, because literally these are goals that converge. So these are the kind of solutions that we're talking about, are looking at, for example, addressing menstrual hygiene, so availability of menstrual hygiene products, but also the big problem of menstrual waste disposal. Sanitary napkins apparently take 800 years to decompose. So every sanitary napkin ever used is still there on this planet, right? And incineration causes, dioxins and furans. So problems which are, one, critical to the climate, but are also very, very basic at a human level. So we're looking at innovations that address human needs for 11 billion people, which is what the world population will be by 2030, by the time these innovations are deployed at scale. But also flourishing lives for 11 billion people, meeting most of their basic needs and more, with a goal towards net zero. So that's the kind of work we're trying to do in India, with also with our international partners. It requires investments. It requires patient investment in terms of not just equity and debt, but also grant that helps, that builds in the appetite for risk taking, which also unlocks the other financing instruments, because the crucial role that philanthropic capital and grant money will play in ensuring that some of these very high risk product-based innovations, and I'm not just saying services and platforms which have their own investment ecosystem, product-based innovations which are solving for needs for the future, but of needs which are super complex. Developmental needs along with climate needs will require more high-risk capital, more sort of a long-term horizon capital. Yeah.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. So, Binbin, China has played a huge role in innovation and driving down costs of all the key clean energy technologies, solar PV, batteries, wind. How do you see China playing in the innovation space, say, in the next couple of decades? Will we also be relying on China to cut the costs of those other technologies that are not yet commercial yet? How do you kind of see I know this is a big question, but how do you see the innovation space in China playing out?
Yes, it's really a big question. But what I learned from the two panelists just now is also my experience here with the World Fellow Program is I feel so appreciation, to U.S. and the international organizations, because the people here, the faculty here, they are really reflecting how to reshape the world order. And we all know the current world order was shaped or was identified by U.S. after the Second World War. But U.S. itself now is reflecting what to make it more sense. I think, wow, it's so great. And today I hear from Andrew, World Bank also think of to change the approach. And the World Bank did a lot of program in Africa. And a lot of my friends learn from World Bank's approach and the strategy, and follow your style to working there. So I think this is the most important thing, that the pioneer, they are reflect, they are try to learn from the lessons, and they show the pathway where the followers can go ahead. And from this perspective, China is a newcomer to overseas investment, in Africa. So I think China should also learn from World Bank, from the other countries, how to do better. To be frankly, currently, I don't think China play a very good role in Africa, although China contribute a lot of money on that continent. And the intention is, yes, I want to contribute and I want to help the people there, but I think it's also a huge gap to reach to really show the good heart. So But what I also say, I always say that we should look at one person or one country from both sides. So I read a very short news this morning. It's a social entrepreneur from China, a lady, and she has worked in Africa for more than 10 years. And like Andrew mentioned, solar is the change maker. And so she also worked on solar, but she tried to learn the human needs in Africa. So she visited the village there and talked with the people. And now her company invests on solar-powered tablets and with pre-loaded content, and thus helps the poor women and the kids to learn knowledge and, in the rural area. Like some women, they know how to praying, how to prating, how to shaving and earn money to raise their kids. So we can see this kind of like a good point and from local level. And I think it's a long learning by doing process. And only China itself, I don't think it can really make some change. And now we call it we are a global village, and we should learn from each other, and we should go forward together. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a great message on international collaboration. So I think we've covered some really interesting ground here on this panel discussion, but let's open it up now to questions from our audience. Now, do we have a roving mic? I don't know how we do this.
We have
I think
two.
I see a mic up there, Julia. So if you could raise your hands, and Julia will come by and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for being here. My question for Andrea is, what specific challenges and potential solutions you are looking at when deploying clean energy projects in Africa? And also, do you think it would be beneficial to have kind of like the Great Electrification Act that the United States had? Because 100 years ago, America had like 0% of rural energy access, and now every farmer in America has electricity, no matter how far-fetched they are.
Fantastic. That's a great question. So, the challenges that we are facing is a little bit what I mentioned before. We are facing logistical challenges, how hard it is to reach certain areas. We are having affordability challenges where people cannot actually pay for electricity supply. We are also having fragility issue in the sense that we are going to work on, we are working already in areas that are very prone to conflict, because we already went to the easy one. It was so much easier to get there. Now, concerning the grid is always an option, but it doesn't mean that it's the option for SDG 7. It doesn't mean that it's a viable option for 2030. Yes, ideally, at some point in the future, it will be good, where it makes sense to provide grid connection. But we have to think about what is the least cost electrification strategy. We have 3 ways to go there. The first one is grid, simply extending the grid. That's for urban areas, which is fine, but we're not there yet, in the sense that the people that we're missing are the rural people, right? We have distributed renewable energies, I'm talking about standalone specifically, that are for low consumption and very, very remote areas. These are for us to tick the box and say this person has been electrified. Even if it's a small device, look, it's better than nothing. So we have to aim at that as our primary strategy in this context. And the third one is mini grids. Mini grids are to be deployed where the areas are densely populated, and where actually it makes sense in economies of scale. Now, what are the connecting points between these last 2 approaches? Well, they involve a private sector actor. They are not going to be necessarily or entirely a burden to the public sector, because only by creating a replicable model we can make this work, because we have the solution. That's also what Bim was saying. We have the solution. We have to find a way to make this work. Because if it works only in paper, it's like the doctor that say, the operation has been successful, but the patient is dead, right? That's all. Yeah.
Excellent. Another question, please.
So much of the developing world is early in its decarbonization journey, and there's more of a challenge to decarbonize because energy from fossil fuels is critical to raising low standards of living, making it maybe a more arduous task than a country with more momentum like the United States. Given this, do you wish that more people from countries like the US focus their effort on decarbonization in the developing world? Or would that only muddy the waters with foreign actors who may not have a sufficient understanding for the country or region they're operating in?
Who would like to take? Smita, do you want to take that one on?
Short answer, yes. Yes. Of course, right? That's the whole idea around common but differentiated responsibilities and the debate around, staggered net zero goals for different countries. And, the arguments around every country's development priorities being different and therefore the energy security and energy access problems taking center stage before transition and the whole concept of just energy transition. All of those are great arguments. But what we're doing in that process is that we're all sort of delaying each other. And therefore, the reason I advocate the innovations agenda and I say exactly what you said, but how do the developed countries work on tech transfer, work on financing, in order to make sure that it's not a global push that makes developing world have sooner net zero targets, but they're incentivized to do so. Right? Mm-hmm. If I need to meet my energy access goals, more than 700 million, around some 740 million people still don't have access to electricity. And it's the same size as the population of Europe, but except that population doesn't live in Europe, right? So these challenges would right incentives would be the right nudges in a collaborative space, not necessarily negotiations and pressure. Because that will get us nowhere, like Bin was saying earlier. But tech transfer, broader collaboration on international scale up, on opening markets to newer solutions and financing would be the key. But yes.
Great. Thank you. Another question.
Thank you very much. I would have asked Andrea to answer the question, but since Shmita, you've been touching on it. I'll ask either panel to tackle it. In Africa, one of the biggest challenges they're facing right now is debt restructuring.
Could you speak up a little, please? I'm sorry, we're not quite hearing you.
Yeah, I'm saying that in Africa, the biggest challenge that most states are facing is debt restructuring. And we are now moving to transitions whereby debt restructuring is also linked to green finance. And there is a challenge where states are saying that the interest rates that they are paying when it comes to the current infrastructure is really lopsided. How does this sit with international financial institutions who model the way these debts should be restructured, paid, or varied over time? And are the reasons and the challenges raised by these states valid? And if so, how does this sit with international financial institutions into the future? Thanks.
I'll take the hot potato. Okay, fantastic.
International financial institutions.
Okay. From my perspective and my experience, working on energy access issues in developing countries, and chiefly in Africa, the type of financing that is provided by international organizations such as the World Bank is composed of two big instruments through the International Development Association, IDA. One is grant and one is loan. Every project uses a blend of both instruments, depending on the results that they aim to achieve. Every country has a pot of money that's been given for grant that's only eligible for particularly impactful projects. You can imagine there is not much money to be made in the energy access sector, yet it's a key priority. How do we get there? We get there through grant, but we also get there through loans. Now, the loans that IDA provides to developing countries, it's concessional. It's a concessional rate where the interest rate is basically nil. This is what happens from the World Bank's point of view. Now, how are these loans structured is that it's usually not a blank check, meaning when you have a loan for a project, is agreed with the government what the project would be. And the owner of this whole structure, this whole approach, is always the government. The World Bank doesn't do one thing. The World Bank provides support, provides assistance, but the ownership is always on the government side. This is to say that compared to the top-down approach that we've had so far in development, which is, it's not ideal because results have to be on. Impact has to be real and has to be on the ground. We are moving more and more towards the involvement and the most complete ownership on part of the client governments. Now, where does this stand on the debt restructuring? That's a very complex issue. I will not be able to address that question directly because this goes really beyond my purview. But I wanted to share with you that how projects are structured, they're made in a way to ensure fairness, equity, and most importantly, ownership on the government side. When I go to countries and I meet with governments, ministries, there is nothing that I take on myself. It's always the implementing agency, which is the Ministry of Energy, Health, or Education, depending on the project, that is taking care of it so that we achieve a key point that we were talking about, development. And one of the issues that perhaps we see on the China side, that is building local capacity. Building local capacity is really key because it's not just a matter of lack of funding, but it's how do we use that money, who uses it. So building the capacity in the implementing a country. I hope that answers your question. I did my best. Thank you.
All right, and we have the last question over here.
Thank you very much. I would just like to follow up on your last statement about building local capacity. In Sierra Leone, we've got the barefoot women who have been trained in India on energy access and solar. For the past nearly 15 years, they've been doing great work with government. However, when government changes, these people are never really referred to. There is a huge knowledge gap between community women like these and practitioners, including my colleague Wall Fellows right there. What is the World Bank doing to showcase indigenous successful and sustainable initiatives on the global platform? How do we bring the voices of women like the Barefoots to share what they have done so that the global energy crew will learn from what they've done? I think all of you can answer that if possible.
Please do start. Don't answer for the World Bank, but please go ahead and I'll check.
Good kisses.
Okay. I'll tackle this a little, but I also want my co-panelists to speak. Okay. Gender, like climate, is one of the key cross-cutting area inside of the World Bank, let's say infrastructure, internal infrastructure. We have global practices which are thematic. So you have infrastructure, you have water, you have health, and so on and so forth. And you have topics and areas that are cross-cutting. Climate means that we are evaluating what is the climate impact in terms of emission for every single project, right? But gender is another one of them. What does this mean? This means that every single project approved by the World Bank has to have a gender component, has to have a clearly measurable and monitored gender outcome. Whenever I have an energy access project, I have always indicators of how many people provided with new or improved electricity services. How many of them are women? How many businesses are provided with new or improved electricity services? how many of them are women-led? And there is a minimum of 50%. Otherwise, the project fails on indicator. Now, it's not always met completely because reality is different from indicators. That's fine. But where we are going here is that making this a requirement and having technical assistance and capacity building to communities, it's necessary. It's a prerequisite. We can't even approve a project without that. In my role, I provide technical assistance, not on gender, but my colleagues do, to make sure that every electricity access project has this type of gender approach. And I feel that's really making the difference because like climate, this is one of the areas where we are seeing stronger and stronger push from client countries in order to make this happen. I'll stop here.
If I could just add, not speaking for the World Bank, but from the experience of the Indian subcontinent and not just India, so to say, and Africa and Indian subcontinent, both these regions have a lot of commonalities, starting from our colonial legacies, but also in terms of our economic development priorities, and to add to it, our vulnerabilities to climate change, right? So there are so many cross-learnings, and you spoke about some of these trainings, and I'm aware of initiatives between India and African countries where there is this focus on learning from what has done, so transferring of best practices and capacity building. But I think one of the key elements, and sometimes capacity building, to be honest, I see it as a must-have component on program design, but not as a very clearly thought-out component. What are we trying to build capacities on, right? Are we looking at integration into value chain, into manufacturing, into value chain? Very often than not, those capacity buildings are one-off elements of program design, and that's where the problem is. I think learning from the Indian subcontinent and Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Nepal, there's many examples of women being included in the value chain. So those trainings, the technical training, the gender-based programs, but including them in the value chain of clean energy solutions. Because so many of these solutions, when we talk about cook stoves, which is clean cooking, which is a problem in Africa and India, these are problems that women face more. And then including them in the value chain of manufacturing, but also the delivery value chain, and have been successful programs. Also in terms of last mile data collection, using women entrepreneurs and working with them has been something, those have been successful models. So happy to exchange notes, and I'm sure we'll talk.
May I?
Thank you.
May I add some
Bin,
points?
yes.
So my point is at the micro level and focus on gender. And 4 years ago, I participated in a female leadership program called Homeward Bound. And after 1 year coach, every year they recruit 100 female leaders, female scientists around the world. And we come together, discuss about how to protect Mother Nature, how to address climate change. And this program helped me to realize, gender issues gender justice is a global issue, a global challenge. And right before World Fellow, Susu, our fellow from Sierra Leone, sent me a message. Hey, my colleague, could you tell me the number or some data about climate and gender? And before Susu, UN Women in China also came to me because they know me. They know I once participated in this kind of program. So they check with me. Hi, do you have any data, any research, any paper about climate and gender? Sorry to say, no. Empty. So nowadays, the general issue is that we only have cases at local level, but it's only stopped case by case. We have no systematic research on climate and gender. So here, at the end of this panel, I'd like to call on all the faculties here, the colleagues here, please do more research, more data analysis on female, on gender justice. And if World Bank can, please help to sponsor Susu, a project on climate and gender in Africa, please.
I write a check.
Thank you, Bin. That's a great takeaway message. And we're at the end of our panel. I've been given a little signal that we have to finish up. So why don't we just, perhaps each of you could share just one takeaway message. Maybe Bin, you've already provided yours, but you can have another one if you would like. One takeaway message that you'd like all of our audience to carry carry away with this afternoon. So, Smita, what message do you have?
I would say, I'll probably just, the gentleman's left, but quickly on the debt structuring part, that is a conversation, honestly, that is an elephant in the room that's not being addressed. So that's a conversation and not just this room, but like, it's an elephant in every room that's not being addressed around Africa's debt restructuring. My only message would be, in our energy transition conversations, let's not forget the access component. And just energy transition isn't just a word added to the phrase, but it has to be for everybody and meet the needs of everybody, and not just a mad rush towards clean energy, forgetting many of our fellows behind.
Fantastic, Andrea.
Okay, fantastic. The big honor of closing this. Well, yes, indeed, we should not forget access as a priority, in the sense that we're talking about clean energy transition, but you have to have something to transition from, right? So if you don't have access to electricity, what are you transitioning from? So that has to be a key priority. But what I wanted to share with you is that, and what I feel that should be really a core element whenever you think about your work and your action on this world, is not just what you're working on, but how are you working? We want to see more impact in our work. We have done a lot of research, and it's always good, but I would like to see this translated into operation, into people that really want to make a change. And this comes from only one place, which is one's heart. So to really put your heart in making the change that you would like to see around you.
Fantastic. Bin?
Are you still giving me an opportunity?
You're allowed. You don't have to use it, but if you want, you get a second message.
I want to use
Always
it.
take the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Consider the current tension between U.S. and China. I think at the end of this panel, I really want to express some message. Right before this conference, early this week, the two special envoys from U.S. and China, they met with each other in San Francisco. And both of them are over 70s, 80s. Yeah, they still work very hard to see how to show the joint efforts to address climate change and send out the positive signal to the international community. So nowadays, I really hope that please stop the blame game and let's work together. And not only like US and China, but all countries, we should show our collective efforts for the common goal. Thank you.
That's a great message. A great round of applause for our panelists.